Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 738, and today is January 2nd, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Hope everybody had a great New Year's Day. For those of you who wanted some content, I did put out an episode of Conflicts of the Kyle Anzalone Show as a podcast-only episode of Conflicts of Interest. So if you guys haven't signed up for the Kyle Anzalone Show yet, please head on over to YouTube and do so. It is the first link in the show notes page, and I think that is going to be a project that I really try to grow. If you listen to that episode that I published, I think you'll all understand why I'm so dedicated, and I believe that that show could really be a massive thing. And it starts off, just with a few hundred YouTube subscribers. So for those of you who can head on over and give me just a little bit more of a boost before we start cranking out some episodes for that show, I would really appreciate it. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the news today. The first story we have, of course, is FBI says New Orleans attacker was an Army veteran with an ISIS flag. So I'm sure most of you are aware that early morning New Year's Day, there was an attack in the French Quarter of New Orleans that killed at least 15 people and injured more than 30. The attacker is identified as Samsud Din Jabbar, and he was killed in a firefight with police shortly after the crash. The FBI said in a statement that weapons, including potentially improvised explosive devices or IEDs, and an ISIS flag were found inside the vehicle. The FBI said other potential IEDs were found in the French Quarter, and Jabbar was likely not acting alone. So Athena Duncan, the assistant special agent in charge of the FBI New Orleans office, told reporters, "We do not believe that Jabbar was solely responsible." According to the Associated Press, investigators are looking for additional suspects and reviewed videos showing 3 men and a woman placing IEDs in connection with the attack. The Sugar Bowl, an annual college football game held in New Orleans, was postponed until Thursday, and I watched some coverage of that announcement and just the way the ESPN anchors were talking about the situation. It seemed like there was either a real concern that there were IEDs placed inside the Superdome, or were at least they thought it was a real possibility. It seemed that the media, who would normally sit, especially for a big game, college football playoff, things like that, early in the morning they're sitting down at field level. There's no players out there, there's nobody in the stadium, but they have a couple commentators there sitting there giving their opinion, and they were not able to do that. They were asked to leave the building, and I think it wasn't until evening yesterday that they actually let even the media back inside the Superdome. So it seemed that there was real concern that this was a much larger attack, or at least was supposed to be a much larger attack. Now, there are also signs that this wasn't just limited to New Orleans. Also on Wednesday, a Tesla Cybertruck exploded at Trump Hotel in Los Angeles, killing the driver and injuring 7 people nearby. Officials said the truck contained fireworks-style mortars. So I guess, the ones that you light and you stick in the tube and they go up, I don't know, maybe 80 feet or so, in a fairly large explosion. Certainly not large enough to cause the explosion that we saw in the Cybertruck. And the incident is being investigated as a potential terrorist attack. According to reports, both the Cybertruck and the Ford truck used in New Orleans were rented using the app Turo. And so that could suggest that, maybe there was some coordination there. Also, if you just look at the some of the pictures I have seen from the Cybertruck, it looks like there maybe was a tank of propane or something back there too. So it's not 100% impossible that this was just a really, really irresponsible actor who had a bunch of flammable things in the back of a Cybertruck, and due to either some heat or other accident, that was set off. I think more likely is that was a separate terrorist attack. I saw Elon Musk really touting the Cybertruck's durability on Twitter, saying that, an explosive was planted in the truck, and that the truck is just so sound that even though it's like you pull up to a hotel, right? There's the road outside, there's like a pavilion overhead that's attached to the overall structure, and that's where the valet are. They take your luggage and things like. So that's where that explosion could occurred. And I had read reports that not even the windows in the hotel lobby were blown out. So whatever this second attack was supposed to be, if it was an attack, certainly did not seem to be particularly well thought out, in that it wasn't able to obviously accomplish the damage that they wanted to do. Where with the New Orleans attack, obviously that attack, not trying to tout the terrorist success, but to say that they obviously accomplished their goal of inflicting terror on the American people and killing some American civilians in that New Orleans attack. So in regards to the New Orleans attack, the FBI said it was working to determine Jabbar's potential association and affiliation with terrorist organizations. Sources told CNN that investigators have found writings the FBI believes supports investigators' view that the attack was inspired by ISIS. A spokesman for the U.S. Army said Jabbar was in the Army from 2007 to 2020. From 2007 till 2015, he served as Human Resources Specialist and Information Technology Specialist on active duty and deployed to Afghanistan once during that time. From 2015 until 2022, Jabbar was in the reserves. While the motive remains unclear, the attack comes after more than a year of the U.S. backing Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, and the support for Israel has historically been a motive for terrorist attacks against the U.S. The U.S. has also significantly stepped up its bombing campaign against ISIS in Syria in recent months. On the other hand, the U.S. helped Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, an offshoot of al-Qaeda that has a similar ideology to ISIS, take over Syria. And so there's a lot to break down here. And the first thing I have to mention is this is something that we have been talking about on the show over a year now. Really, I would think since last November, I probably started bringing up the fact that in response to the U.S. backing of Israel in their genocidal campaign against the Palestinians, there's a very real possibility that could blow back against the United States. And certainly there are a lot of U.S. military targets in the Middle East that could be hit. But some of these jihadists, they don't mind coming overseas, coming to America and killing innocent American civilians. And so I think that's a very real possibility that this was a result of the U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza and the just slaughter of so many innocent civilians. I would imagine that there are a lot of people who are going on the internet, going on TikTok, ads, Instagram, day after day, and they see, scene after scene after scene of just dismembered Palestinian children killed by sniper rounds to the head. They read the reports that the Israelis gunned down the Palestinians. And these are reports from the IDF in Israeli military. This isn't, somebody being propagandized and indoctrinated by Hamas. This is people seeing the reality of what's going on in Gaza, that the Israelis are shooting the Palestinians and allowing the stray pats of wild dogs to eat their bodies. I mean, the cruelty, the level of inhumanity, the fact that the Israelis look at the Palestinians as lesser than rats in your house, that they just want them dead. It is so disgusting and has to be a reality for so many people. And yes, there are kooky people out there who are driven to commit violence when they see this much violence committed against others. And, that doesn't in any way justify the attacks in New Orleans, but is to say that we could have prevented this if we had stopped supporting Israel earlier. Now, the other point to all this, and this is kind of the second prong, I kind of been making a two-pronged point, especially over the past month here, is not only is the U.S. taking actions by supporting Israel that are fueling jihadism and driving people into the arms of jihadists, believing that the jihadists are right, that America must be brought down, that Israel must be brought down, that there has to be attacks carried out in the United States to ultimately weaken the U.S. empire, to bring the U.S. empire to its knees, is obviously something that's happened a lot. Now, the other half of that, of course, is backing the takeover of al-Jawad al-Jolani, the former deputy commander of the Islamic State, the founder of the al-Nusra Front, al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, a veteran of the Iraq War where he fought against U.S. soldiers, and a man who watched the towers come down on 9/11 and took up arms against the Americans. Abu Mohammed al-Jolani is now the ruler of Syria, and the U.S. played a fundamental, if not the most important role in making that happen with, the decades-long program of supporting Jolani and the other jihadist organizations, supporting the Syrian Kurds to occupy the most valuable Syrian land, to prevent Assad from retaking that land, preventing any reconciliation deal between Assad's government and the Syrian Kurds, and of course the sanctions regime against Syria, all brought Syria down, brought the Assad government down, and helped usher Jolani into Damascus. And it's at least reasonable to ask if a month after that occurred, a month after we helped al-Qaeda win the Syrian civil war, if there is now so this is an article that's is from Scott's book Provoked that we ran at antiwar.com over Christmas, and I wrote a short intro for it. And the intro basically just said, look at what's happening in Syria, look at what's happening in Gaza. Now read this excerpt from Scott's book for Vote about the Bosnian War and how we bat these jihadists because we believe that we owed them one. But they turned out to be ungrateful allies, and after we bat them in the Bosnian War, they still turned around and conducted 9/11 just a few years later. And so it's very possible that when you back these groups, that they don't care, that they're not, we owe the Americans a favor now. We're never going to attack the United States of America because they helped us win the Syrian civil war. I think more likely what that did is al-Qaeda raided the coffers of the Assad regime. They got a lot of weapons from former Syrian soldiers. They have a lot more room to operate now. And so again, while the timing seems like it would be very quick if this attack had anything to do with Syria, in some of the maybe void created by the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, that this attack was able to be planted and carried out, or if rather the Jolani government explicitly allowed this attack to be carried out from Syrian territory, or, plotted from Syrian territory in some way, helped, to send some funds or something. I don't think anything like that is impossible. Certainly something that we should continue to keep an eye on and talk about. And even if it's not this attack, it may be the next one. And I think we're in a real chance here that this is not while this attack may have even been an isolated cell, that these people may be taken down, that we're going to see more of this in 2025. That's not a prediction I want to make. It scares me to make that prediction, particularly after Trump becomes president. I think he's more likely to have a massive response to something like this than the outgoing Biden administration is. But I think we're going to see more of this in 2025. It's an awful prediction. I don't want to make it, but I do think that's what we are looking at. There is just a large amount of blowback terrorism ready to blow into the United States. And, I think we have to be ready for that. I think we have to be ready to talk about it and how to address it to ensure that, this time when we react to it, we don't end up creating more terrorism. All right, next up here, Russian gas flows to Europe through Ukraine ends as deal expires. So this one from Dave DeCamp, December 31st, antiwar.com. Russia gas deliveries to Europe through Ukrainian pipeline will end on January 1st as a 5-year agreement signed in 2019 ends at the end of 2024. Russian gas continued to flow through the Soviet-era pipeline following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, under a deal signed between Russia's Gazprom and Ukraine's state-run energy company prior to that invasion. The Russian news agency TASS reported there was no orders for gas to be pumped through the pipeline on January 1st and said that meant the chances of a last-minute deal to keep the gas flowing were slim. Ukraine chose not to renew the agreement, a step that angered Slovakia, which receives Russian gas through the Ukrainian pipeline. From Slovakia, the pipeline split and took gas to Austria and the Czech Republic. So Slovakia's current prime minister, Robert Fico, an opponent of NATO's proxy war in Ukraine, had warned Slovakia could take reciprocal measures in response to Ukraine not renewing the deal. He said those measures could include cutting electricity exports to Ukraine. In comments to Politico, the Ukrainian energy minister dismissed Fico's threat, saying, "I don't think that they would do this. If Slovakia does cut electricity to Ukraine, Poland said it could boost power production." According to Reuters, Slovakia is not expected to face gas shortages and could make up what it loses through a pipeline by importing more from Hungary, Poland, and Austria. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out. But, we've seen this before where Kiev really has a habit of irking their neighbors in Eastern Europe, believing that the U.S. being the dominant player in European affairs will just kind of override whatever they do to upset their neighbors. But, at some point that may start to have real impacts on Kiev's ability to continue to withstand the Russian onslaught and had to make some real concessions. All right, next up here, moving over to the Middle East, Israel kills dozens of Palestinians in Gaza on New Year's Day. So the Israeli military started the new year by massacring dozens of Palestinians in Gaza, killing at least 28 in attacks across the Strip since dawn on Wednesday. In northern Gaza, Israeli strikes hit a home in Jabalia, killing at least 15. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, most of the dead were women and children. 7 Palestinians were also reported killed by an Israeli attack on a home in east of Gaza City. In Khan Yunis, southern Gaza, at least 4 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli sniper, and in the central Barouji refugee camp, 2 were killed. Amid the Israeli strikes, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz threatened to increase attacks on Gaza in response to the rocket fire from the Strip, which caused little damage in Israel. So Katz said, "I want to send a clear message from here to the heads of the terrorists in Gaza. If Hamas does not soon allow the release of Israeli hostages from Gaza and continues firing rockets at Israeli communities, it will face blows of intensity not seen in Gaza for a long time." Amid the relentless Israeli attacks, displaced Palestinians currently living in flimsy tents are suffering from the cold weather and rains. At least 7 Palestinian babies have died due to exposure over the past week. Gaza's health ministry said in its casualty report on Wednesday that at least 12 Palestinians were killed and 41 were injured by the Israeli attacks in the previous 48-hour period. The ministry released its figures about midday and only accounts the dead and wounded Palestinians brought to hospitals and morgues. And there are, remember, no hospitals left in northern Gaza, and so this is certainly going to make the undercount of the deaths in Gaza even greater. So Al Jazeera reported that during the month of December, Israel conducted around 1,400 airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, about 45 per day. The heavy airstrikes killed at least 1,170 Palestinians, according to the health ministry. The health ministry said Wednesday that its recorded death toll since October of 2023 has reached 45,553, and the number of wounded is over 108,000. All right, next up, going on, UN says Israel has turned Gaza's hospitals into death traps. So a report released by the UN Human Rights Office on Tuesday condemned Israeli attacks on hospitals in Gaza, saying the campaign against medical infrastructure in the Strip is a direct consequence of Israel's disregard for international law. So the UN Human Rights High Commissioner, that's Volker Turk, said, "As if the relentless bombing and dire humanitarian situation in Gaza was not enough, the one sanctuary where Palestinians should have felt safe has become a death trap. Israel usually claims there's a presence of militants to justify attacks on hospital, but never provides any real evidence, which the report notes. The report says insufficient information has so far been made publicly available to substantiate these allegations, which have remained vague and broad, and in some cases appear contradicted by publicly available information. And sometimes that information is released by Israel, right? So when they took down the Kamal Adwan hospital last week, the Israelis had a knife and a couple pistols, and they said, see, this is proof there were militants there. But there being a couple militants who are receiving medical care, or a couple of small arms in the hospital, which may not have even belonged to militants. I mean, given the situation in Gaza, if ordinary Gazans were able to and were carrying around pistols or something like that at this point, not only for protection from the IDF, and I'm not sure if it would make sense to try to gauge an IDF soldier with a pistol, but as people are starving to death, as there are no systems of law or anything like that in Gaza anymore, as the IDF is actually actively protecting gangs of Palestinians who are robbing and looting the aid trucks. Maybe having a pistol, you feel like this is the way to protect your family and what they actually still have from being taken, from being looted. And so again, the presence of a pistol in a hospital in a war zone just isn't enough to justify taking down the hospitals. And so the report found that there were at least 136 Israeli strikes on 27 hospitals and 12 other medical facilities in Gaza between October 12, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. The Israeli attacks caused significant casualties among civilians, including patients, doctors, nurses, and other medical staff. The report found that by the end of June 2024, Israel had killed over 500 medical personnel in Gaza. In November, Gaza's government media office said the number of medical workers killed was over 1,000. I mean, that is just unbelievable, right? To kill 1,000 doctors, nurses, paramedics. You know that when you're killing that many medical professionals, you're also increasing the mortality rate in Gaza by quite a bit. Forget even about somebody who's been shot in the leg, shot in the chest, shot in the gut or something, and who could maybe in certain situations get to a hospital and receive life-saving care. All those people are dying, but also think about somebody who's maybe having a diabetic episode, somebody who's having a seizure, your 50, 60-year-old father who maybe has a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. Where are all those people going to get medical care? Where are they going to find doctors to help them? Where are all those people dying? And if that's the case, then, the death toll is a lot higher than we already know, because there's a lot of people that should be alive but are dead because of the punishment that Israel has inflicted upon their homeland. All right, next up here, U.S. has given Israel $22 billion in military aid since October of 2023. So since October 7, 2023, the U.S. has provided Israel with more than $22 billion in military aid, Israel Hayom reported on Wednesday, citing data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SPIRI. The stepped-up U.S. military aid to Israel has supported the genocidal war in Gaza, Israel's war in Lebanon, and military operations in the occupied West Bank, as well as attacks on Syria, Iran, and Yemen. According to SPIRI, from 2019 until 2023, U.S. weapons account for 69% of Israel's arms imports. Since October 7th, that number has risen to 78%, demonstrating Israel's significant reliance on U.S. military aid. In October of 2024, Brown University's Cost of War project said the U.S. had provided Israel with $17.9 million in military aid during the first year of the onslaught in Gaza. Since then, Israel has signed a $5.2 billion contract with Boeing to purchase F-15 fighter jets, a deal funded by the U.S., bringing the total U.S. military aid since October 7, 2023 to over $22 billion. The Cost of War report also said the U.S. military operations in the Middle East to support Israel cost American taxpayers at least $4.8 billion, a number that must have also risen since the U.S. has continued to bomb Yemen and deployed a THAAD air defense missile system to Israel. Israeli officials have been candid about how reliant they are on U.S. support, and Israeli Air Force officer told Haaretz that without U.S. military aid, the Israeli military would not be able to support operations in Gaza for more than a few months. And so this genocide is 100% only happening because of what the U.S. is doing. All right, now let's take a quick detour from Gaza and talk about the West Bank. Israeli settler violence in 2024, highest since the UN began keeping track. So the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, said Wednesday that 2024 marked the worst year for Israeli settler violence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem since it began tracking incidents nearly 20 decades ago. OSHA said it reported about 1,400 incidents of settler violence in 2024, which amounts to nearly 4 attacks per day. The incident involved physical assaults, arson attacks, raids on Palestinian communities, and the destruction of fruit trees. Israeli settlers have been increasingly emboldened since the current Netanyahu government took power in December of 2022. The coalition government, which includes extremist settlers, released a statement when it was first formed saying it would make West Bank settlement expansions a priority. The genocidal war in Gaza has served as a distraction from the situation in the West Bank, which settlers have taken advantage of. Amid the increased settler violence, the Netanyahu government has also approved major Israeli land grabs in the occupied territory. Also, you would have to imagine that the dehumanization which has occurred to Palestinians in Gaza also has to have a carryover effect to Israel proper and the West Bank, where, some of these West Bank settlers are probably the same Israeli soldiers that sit in the Nazarene corridor and shoot innocent Palestinian civilians and then allow dogs to eat their bodies. And so when they go home to the West Bank, it probably means absolutely nothing. Or maybe they even feel a compulsion to do it, right? This is sometimes how PTSD works, where you have to get yourself to that level of intensity that you have felt before, that you had to try recreate those scenarios. And so maybe, now after being able to gun down Palestinians in Gaza, you had to go beat up a couple Palestinians in the West Bank in order to, feel something, because your soul has been destroyed by participating in a true genocide in Gaza. So the OSHA report said more than 480 Palestinians, including 91 children, have been killed across the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Most of them were killed by Israeli forces. The office added that the Palestinians from the West Bank killed 35 Israelis, including 3 children, in either the West Bank or Israel. The incoming Trump administration is expected to be incredibly supportive of Israel's plans continuing to steal land in the West Bank. President-elect Trump's pick to serve as ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is an outspoken proponent of Israel completely taking over the occupied territory, which he calls Judea and Samaria. During a visit to the West Bank settlement in 2017, Huckabee said, "I think Israel has title deed to Judea and Samaria. There's certain words I refuse to use. There's no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as a settlement. They're communities, they're neighborhoods, they're cities, and there's no such thing as an occupation." So, of course, Mike Huckabee with the most deplorable statements. All right, wrapping up the show for today. This one, the last article I wrote of 2024, we'll be talking about today. White House calls for Syria elections as soon as possible in response to Jelani's 4-year timeline. A U.S. official explained that the Joe Biden administration was hoping Syria could hold elections as soon as possible following the ouster of longtime President Bashar al-Assad. The de facto ruler in Damascus, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, said elections could take place in 4 years. In an interview published on Sunday, Jolani explained that elections could happen in 4 years and a new constitution could be installed in 3. He said the process of writing the constitution may take about 3 years, and we look forward to a constitution that lasts for as long as the longest possible period, and this is a difficult and lengthy task. Organizing elections may take 4 years. Any valid election requires a comprehensive population census. A U.S. official responding to those remarks told The National on Monday that Syria's elections should be free and fair and carried out in a transparent and inclusive manner. We hope these conditions will be in place as soon as feasibly possible. Ultimately, we would like to see Syria that is inclusive and protects human rights and fundamental freedoms of all Syrians, including women and minority groups. So Giuliani swept to power in Syria at the beginning of December after more than a decade of a violent American intervention in the country. Washington backed al-Qaeda-linked terrorist organizations against Assad while imposing crippling sanctions that devastated the Syrian economy. The result of the policy is that Giuliani, a veteran of al-Qaeda in Iraq and the leader of a militia designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the State Department, is now the ruler of Syria. The Biden administration claims Giuliani has broken from his al-Qaeda roots and is committed to establishing an inclusive government in Damascus that protects minority sets. However, Giuliani has staffed his government with al-Qaeda-linked fighters that helped him to overthrow Assad, including foreign jihadists. The White House may be starting to recognize that the jihadists it helped to empower in Damascus have no interest in supporting liberal values. On Tuesday, a State Department official was dispatched to Syria to discuss the attacks on minority groups. All right, everyone, that's where I'm wrapping up the show today. Thank you so much for tuning into the show, not just today, but for all of your support during 2024. 2024 was a big year for me. I think I made a lot of gains. I was a regular on the Judge Napolitano show, one of the biggest shows discussing foreign policy out there for about half the year. So I had a lot of appearances there. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of articles over the past year and a few op-eds as well. So doing a lot of work. I'm hoping I could get a little bit more done in 2025 and that, we could really make some gains with the Kyle Anzalone show because I think I got something really special there. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. I'll be back with another episode tomorrow.